Alright, so Guilty Gear has gone through a number of significant changes throughout its history, especially just in Strive. Just recently, we had them removing DPRC from the game, which is something that people never thought would be removed from Guilty Gear. We had them remove Hard Knockdown from Wall Assault on wall breaks, and they also even just completely removed character weights. Now character weights are equalized, and that's another big change that happened to Guilty Gear throughout Strive's history. Today, I want to talk about what I think should probably be the next large-scale change for Guilty Gear Strive. Throughout the history of fighting games, balancing characters by their health value has happened for many years now. Guilty Gear is no exception to that. One of the most common ways that you see characters balanced by health is the Akuma type of character, which is basically a glass cannon, a character that has every tool you could possibly ask for. They're conceptually pretty broken, but they die in like 2 combos, right? In Guilty Gear, we have a character like Chip, for example, that falls under that. And this character archetype is not one that people are usually super fond of because they can just be kind of frustrating to fight. But for today's video, I want to talk about a different type of character. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about character health in Strive, and specifically I want to talk about the characters you see on the higher end of the health pool. One of the biggest complaints that Strive has had in the last year or so, I would say, is the high health characters, the high health, high damage characters, specifically just living too long, right? Also, keep in mind, we're not just talking about changing high health characters for the sake of it. A lot of these high health characters are considered some of the strongest characters in the game, largely in part because of their damage output and their health threshold. So that's kind of why it's a critical issue right now, IMO. And there's a lot that goes into this topic, so let's get into talking about why this is a problem that I want to see resolved. So there's a number of characters here that I think have health totals that don't really fit the characters anymore. Keep in mind, Guilty Gear health totals, technically every character has 420 health, and they just have a different defense modifier and guts modifier. We're not going to get too into that. We're just going to talk about their effective health values. Let's take the newest addition to the game, Slayer. So Slayer has an effective health of 566. I don't understand why Slayer has more health than Abba. That doesn't really make any sense to me based on his archetype. I think generally most people think Slayer is better than Abba, and I do think that is true. But there's a couple of other things that I feel like some characters just maybe have more health than they need to. Johnny does not need to have 557 health. I think that's probably just a bit too much for that type of character. Anji, I also think kind of has too much health. Leo maybe has too much health. I would say the average is somewhere between 500 and 533. So the fact that there's all these characters that are above that average, I think is kind of weird, and I want to talk about why that's the case. So the big thing about Guilty Gear is that it is very heavily revolved around risk reward. Every fighting game is to an extent, but I would say Guilty Gear is very much on the extremes, where a lot of matchups honestly can just be dictated based on a character's risk reward potential. Risk reward obviously refers to, how much risk is a character taking when they do something, and how much reward are they getting if that thing works out for them. So if we take a character like Slayer, who's the newest addition to the cast at this point, Slayer is a character with absurd reward, right? He has very, very high reward on everything. Even simple combos can do like 50% to you. The character is very high power level in that regard. And technically, this type of character, I think, is supposed to be balanced out by the risk that he ends up having to take. He's not a character that has super consistent tools, he doesn't have like high neutral or ram neutral or something like that. He does technically have to literally throw himself at the opponent with things like Mappa and whatnot. However, something that kind of alleviates this is your health total. So usually characters that have to play in this high RPS style tend to get higher health. But I think to the extreme that it is in Strive with characters like Slayer and Johnny and whatnot, it ends up skewing risk reward too much to the point where matchups don't matter as much as they should because the character just frankly has too much health to go around. So on top of this, it also just can feel bad to fight against. If you're the opponent and you're fighting like Slayer or Johnny or Anji or something like that, the characters can feel very frustrating to fight because it feels like your hits aren't mattering like they should. It oftentimes can feel like you're hitting the opponent and they're just not dying quick enough, and they don't feel like there's consequences for their actions when you're fighting these characters. Now, I'm in no way saying that these characters shouldn't necessarily have above average health. I'm just more so pointing out that maybe the top threshold of these characters should be a bit lower. So again, a character like Slayer, I don't think he needs to have 566 health. I think something like 530 would probably be a lot more tolerable. I think characters like Johnny and Anji don't need to have 550. They could probably be more like 530 or 540. I would say that Johnny and Anji are largely good because of their health threshold, to a point where it's not healthy that they're good because of this. And then you even have characters like Mei, who has amazing normals, amazing offense, super high damage output, but she's like slightly above average health total for some reason. She doesn't have a downside that justifies having high health. Slayer has high health because theoretically he's supposed to have, risky defense and risky neutral. Mei isn't that. Mei would still be ridiculous if she didn't have 533. If Mei had like 507 like Viken did, she would still be top 5. I think she's another character where I don't know why she has the same health as Kai and Soul roughly. I feel like she should have less. Why does Mei have more than Bedman? What is that? Who coded that? There's a lot of instances of things like this in this game where I think some characters just have higher health than they need to. I'm okay with characters like Potemkin having high health, characters like Gold Lewis having high health. These characters have very defined weaknesses that they do struggle to get in, and they're supposed to be tankier characters, right? So those characters being, you know, in the 560 to 580 range, I think is perfectly fine. I think there's a whole discussion to be had about how effective of a balancing metric health can actually be and whether it's like healthy for a game overall, because oftentimes I at least feel characters are usually just balanced on their health based on like what the character looks like or like what the lore of the character implies, which I get characters should probably, you know, fit their lore at least a little bit, but I think oftentimes this is taken to extreme, and it often also has the opposite effect where some characters have lower health for like no real reason, you know? Kind of a common thing in Guilty Gear that most of like the low health characters just happen to be the women. So like Ram and Elfel and Bridget and Jacko and Milia, for example, they all have lower health because they just look like they should. In some cases, their health is actually justified by their balancing, but I think when it comes to Guilty Gear, the big thing is that this is a game with very potent offense and very high damage. So having a high health is actually really nice for two reasons. It means that you are less susceptible to just getting two-touched, which is kind of the name of the game. But it also means that you are given more opportunities to two-touch the opponent. You know, every time you're leaving Slayer or Abba or Johnny alive, you're giving those characters more opportunities to be able to rob you. That's kind of what they're designed around. So again, I don't really want to like take that away from them per se. I just think the level that it is currently is maybe a little bit too much, and I would like to see it brought back a little bit. I think this is more of a problem now than it was previously because they actually nerfed offense in this game because of the Wild Assault change to where it does not give a hard knockdown on wall break anymore. This means running over characters with high health is even more difficult. You don't get to just, you know, hit Slayer and Johnny and Anji or whatever and just like run your offense for the whole round. You have to go back to neutral, which means that you're giving those characters another chance, going back to what I was saying, where higher health means more chances. These characters often only need one chance, right? So yeah, I just think that this is a change that should probably happen for the overall health of the game. Namely, again, like I think Slayer should probably have less. I think Johnny should have less. Anji, even like Leo and maybe even Soul could arguably have a bit less. Mei should probably not have more health than Bedman. I know the big one that people bring up a lot is Happy Chaos, and I also agree that I don't understand why Happy Chaos is actually relatively healthy for what type of character he is. Happy Chaos has more health than like Eno and Ram and Elfelt for some reason, which just feels a little bit odd. I feel like he should probably be in line with them. And again, I'm okay with characters like, you know, Potemkin and Gold Lewis and Abba. Those characters can have high health because their character very much justifies having that. Now, one thing I know people are going to bring up, this is probably going to be one of the most common thoughts people are having, but as Hugh, I thought that damage was too high in Strive. I thought people wanted damage to be lower in this game. So for one, I actually think damage is mostly in a fine state in this current version of the game. There are particular outliers that I think could be adjusted. I think characters like Soul and Slayer and Mei, I think they do a little bit too much damage. And there's probably some instances of characters that do too much damage off of specific types of hits. But overall, I would say the game is actually in a pretty good spot in terms of damage output. And I think that's actually part of the reason why high health characters are standing out like they do currently, is because damage has actually been lowered throughout the lifespan of this game. And with lower damage, it means that these characters with high health stand out longer, because if you lower damage, those 5 hits that it took previously now take 6 or maybe 7, depending on the character you're playing. And I'm not necessarily saying that every character should have less health. I just think the discrepancy between the high health characters and maybe the more average or lower life characters is a little bit too much right now. The reason why I think their health total should go down is that the other way of going about it is by nerfing the characters more directly, actually nerfing their toolkit and changing what the character does. However, that I think is personally a lot more effort and is oftentimes less fun. You don't want to just have less things you can do with your character, so personally, it's probably best to avoid that, I would say. I want to say that it's high impact for low cost. If you're a Mei player, you're not like upset that you have 20 less HP. You're not like suddenly, I hate playing Mei, she's not fun anymore. But if you're fighting Mei, you feel better that she dies in one less combo. That's what I'm getting at, is it's a less painful change as the people playing the character, because you're not losing your toolkit. The character isn't fundamentally changing. Whereas like, okay, with Mei, if you wanted to nerf Dolphin and nerf her combos and, you know, nerf her damage or something, those are things that are actively going to make the character less fun to play because you're nerfing the tools themselves. Lowering a character's health doesn't like change the functionality of the character. It just changes the effectiveness of it. So it's like a low commitment thing to do that has a high impact without hurting the player base. Because that is something that is like pretty tricky at this point in a game. These characters are very defined in what they do. Every time you nerf something, you are definitely running the risk of alienating the player base. Like look what happened to Zato, right? Zato got turbo code and Zato players are very unhappy with it. You don't want to do that, Ian. But ultimately, you know, if Slayer's going to have 566 health, he should probably have a toolkit and damage output that justifies it. I think right now there are too many characters that are high damage and high health, and it's probably just not healthy for the game in its current position. I do personally think that some of the character health totals should be brought down. I also do know that the way the health is balanced is again by, you know, guts and defense modifier. So how you actually want to go about adjusting each character's effective health is going to be a little bit harder than just, you know, hey, lower Slayer's effective health by like 30 points, right? You gotta do a little bit more working with it and figure out what actually works. But of course, that is just my thoughts on the matter. I personally would like to see a lot of the characters get their health totals brought down. And of course, in line with that, maybe lower the damage of some of these characters like Sol and Mei as well to kind of fully balance out the damage and health thresholds of the game. But that's just my opinion. I do want to know, what do you guys feel about this down in the YouTube comments below? Do you feel like some characters should have less HP? If so, what characters do you think should have less? While you're down there, consider dropping a like and subbing to the channel. It actually helps a ton. YouTube really likes to see comments and likes on a video. It really helps the algorithm, so I'd super appreciate that. And be sure to subscribe because I have a lot more content coming down the pipeline that you won't want to miss out on. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.